So each of the presenters has 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up for more discussion.
Exactly, that's right. Thank you, Susanna. I'm going to stand here so that you can see me and I can see you. I hope that in the hour that we spend together, you come out of this discussion feeling relatively optimistic about the standards implementation initiatives over the past several years and moving forward. The presentation this morning, the summary report, the compilation of the Getting Down to Facts papers is very humbling, I think, for all of us as we see the challenges and the place we are in the state and some of the shining spots of good news balanced by some of the real needs we have. And yet in the standards work, I hope that this discussion is really a little bit of a different flavor, that you help me understand and Susan understand whether or not we've read all of these data correctly. But keep in mind that there's good news here. I was very pleased to be asked to participate here. We have these questions. Susanna gave them away a little bit. They're the reasons you showed up in the first instance. What do we know about how schools and districts are implementing learning systems to implement the new standards? What's the role of leadership here? How are school principals helping with standard implementation? And what do we know about models of leadership that have been appropriate? And something about the resources by CDE around standards implementation and how that's been sort of built up and built around during these last several years as we've watched the standards come into play alongside the assessments. So we'll tackle those today. I have a wonderful colleague in the back, Francesca Delgado, who's here. And the reason Francesca and I always were able to do this is that at Wested we've been fortunate to be kind of immersed in projects of many different kinds and flavors over the last several years. And so this is not research findings from a study, but it really is, it's hodgepodge building things together over many projects and many data collection initiatives, over many different initiatives that allowed us to stitch this together and come to what I think are a relatively consistent set of conclusions. So that's how this is built. So Francesca, thank you for your help and for the help of colleagues who were contributors to those data collection initiatives. So here's the kind of thing you'll see today in this optimistic view of why things in standards implementation are going well. I'm going to sort of scan the slide for a second. We're going to end up in the world of 2/3, and that's kind of an important number that's going to show up time and time again through these slides. 67% said this, or 66% said that, or 60% said something else. So in this particular case, we're making the comment that 2 out of 3 California teachers are saying that their training in PD against the standards has been of high quality. Their school district is providing adequate learning opportunities, and they're getting support in their implementation. These are astoundingly important that many teachers would respond this way. So now the researcher says, pause for just a second. And throughout this work, we have this nagging problem that has to be surfaced early on of the response bias inherent in all survey collections. So 66% or 67% of whom? Well, it's of all the people sampled. And so we get this problem of sort of kind of in the range of anywhere between 40 to 60% response rates in all the survey work that we do. Even when we push really hard, we never really push much past 60%. And so these findings are of those people who responded. So we can't ever know what the people who didn't respond think. And then I'm very open to the discussion of whether or not that's a bias in the positive or negative direction, but it is a warrant, so we can keep track of it. Let's look at another one. Teachers consistently reported meeting with other teachers to talk about the standards of instruction, how to develop materials, how to review student assessment data, working with teachers on instructional decision making. Here's another one. In the May 2017 American Teacher Panel data, which RAND did, and we were involved in the analytics. There's a California subsample. Teachers were surveyed, and they have sufficient opportunities to collaborate. 65% that said their school leaders are providing these wonderful kinds of opportunities across grades, across content. Here's another one, 3/4. California principals, they were surveyed separately, generally agree the opportunities are in which they're participating. Adequate professional learning opportunities for the standards, secondary principals, higher proportions even than elementary. Really high numbers. Right? people trading things off. In order to implement the standards, you had to give something up to get something. And so we asked people, what did you sort of do less of in order so that you could prioritize the implementation of standards? And people have a variety of things that they didn't do as quickly. Maybe they didn't work on other kinds of implementation initiatives, or maybe they slowed down other kinds of timelines, those kinds of things. But a thoughtful consideration that in order to implement against the standards, you have to give up the focus on something else. And we see these, as you well know, these sort of initiative battles in schools. What should you be doing and what do you have to not do along the way? The curriculum materials adoption question is, of course, tied to the standards implementation challenge. When we went out and asked folks, when did you adopt the curriculum materials that were standards aligned? ELA is the light bar, math is the dark bar. Look how late it is for that high 50% number, 2016-17, when in fact most of us in the room would have associated the beginning of the implementation of these new standards somewhere around 2013 year, between 2012 2013. So what is it about the way in which districts weighted on these adoption decisions? What is it about the way that they waited for materials to be released into the marketplace? What were they using instead? One of the things that's been so interesting to us as we've been around in school districts is to have watched the discarding of homegrown curriculum materials that happened relatively early on in the adoption of math and English, in the relative substitution of the textbook systems that have been adopted. At the same time, we know about these autonomy issues in classrooms where people are supplementing with all sorts of things that they're finding online and in other places and from older standards and on and on. But nevertheless, interesting fodder for when all of this was happening. So let me just switch directions for a minute and give you a sense of kind of the context within which some of this sits. The standards implementation work that we've been a part of has not been watching an individual teacher work on their instruction in an isolated way. It's been these most sort of compelling examples of watching systematic networks and communities work together on standards implementation, where there's a lot of humility in the room about how hard it is to not only understand the standards, relearn the teaching of those standards, getting good at those standards, and practicing those standards. So I just want to provide you with two quick examples of systems that we've been a part of where we've seen some of this optimism sort of play out. Math in Common is a network of 10 partnering school districts in California. It affects about 300,000 students. You can see the relative demographics, generously funded by the S.D. Bechtel Jr. Foundation for a really sustained period of time. All in all, these 7 years of helping teachers in math implement standards. We fan out over the state. There are small districts and large districts. There are districts in urban places and in rural places. And the photo just gives you a sense of kind of the rolling up of the sleeves and colleagues working together on things. Networks have been central to how this works. It's about role-like people sitting down. If I'm in this district and you're in that district and we're working with our CNI teams, we're really trying to understand what we can do on quick cycle implementation of observations in classrooms or peer support systems or professional learning communities. This is an opportunity for people in district teams to kind of share their learnings and strategies for how they do it. So an awful lot of very, very thoughtful, slow-going momentum. And when we peel apart these data, that gets you to 2/3 of teachers and 2/3 of leaders saying things. We even see this really humbling incrementalism, which is the kind of thing that's, really boring in a way. If I put up on a billboard, we're moving by 2 percentage points per year the confidence that teachers have in their ability to handle math standards in 7th grade. It's really not a great billboard. And yet, as years go by, we see it ticking along year after year, a couple of percentage points with great consistency, higher rates slightly for newer teachers than more veteran teachers. It's that sort of humbling optimism that you come to, acknowledging that it's not as big and bold a headline as maybe you'd like. We spend a lot of time in these networks looking at data with teams, and you can't see it so well, but I'll give you just a little bit of an insight into it. These are CASP data in California, of course. There are 3 years of data represented on the screen. Of course, the 2018 CASP data have just come in, so we don't have them on the bars yet, but we'll very soon. And I'm just going to take you through this for a second because I think it's worth kind of showing how this kind of works. Tableau analyses to sort of unpack the data so that teacher teams and district teams can work really carefully. This is saying all students who are doing some number of doing well in math in a certain district as contrasted with the state. A small 2015, 16, 17. So looking at these trapezoid patterns of progress, where the midline is dark blue being students who are at or above standards, and light blue students who are ones and twos, not meeting or far below standards. So how would you read this? Well, one thing that you would do if you were me is you would search for these parallelograms. You would search for these incrementalism, this incremental progress of things getting slightly better. You know, it used to be 71% of students not getting ones and twos on CASP, and then it goes from 71 to 69 to 64. So over 3 years, a 7 percentage point change. Those are the kinds of patterns we look for, but at the same time, the English learners are down here, right, with great proportions of students not doing well. As you can see, ways to depict the data, ways to help people understand standards implementation, ways for people to help with the alignment of their initiatives against the data as they're coming in. So we spend a lot of time watching and supporting district teams to do that kind of implementation work. A different idea is the county systems and how they're supporting standards. For those of you not familiar, there are 11 regions in the state that take in all the 15 counties. There's the map on the board. If you've not been lately in, Tuolumne County in Region 6, or you're not familiar with Inyo County on the far eastern part of the state, or you've never been to Siskiyou in the far northern corner of the state, you get a sense of kind of the ruralness of some of the parts of the state and just how complicated our schooling systems are anyway, let alone to try and help people get really good at standards implementation in both math and science. So what do? Well, we've been very fortunate to work with teams. They come together frequently. They're working in role-like groups. They've got a balance between instructional content, and they've got some opportunity to think about the systems in which they implement. We're trying to understand how counties can work to structure these math and science implementation teams using both the power of virtual communication and real-time engagement with different support teams and curriculum and instruction. And here's the point, balancing all the time, right? What does instruction that's aligned to the standards look like, and how does that balance with leadership capacity? So I'm going to fly through a few of the implications that we found in our work, culling all of these different data systems. We make a comment on the investment in internal professional learning systems and structures for helping teachers get their work more standards alone. You cannot do this alone. You need a system within that school and within that district to make it work. We think that there are instructional specialists who need to work on-site in sustained ways. These are the coaches, these are the C&I leaders, these are the people who think about the strength of teacher teamwork, the professional learning communities, all the many kind of organizational models that have been suggested, when done in a durable way, really do support standards implementation. Principal training and support, all of this hinges on the leadership at the site. And we also think that there's this component of instructional management as contrasted with instructional leadership, which is so critical. The standards are too hard, they're too many of them, they're complicated across content areas. No mere mortal could possibly understand them in both disciplines, math and science, and so you need to rely on other resources to help you as a site leader. Professional networks that allow for educators to, on an ongoing basis, invest in their own professional learning. And small steps is my theme here of this incrementalism. Finding a way to build affinity groups and professional learning groups that allow for this to continue to spread to more places. So I'll stop there. Why don't we just stop for just a couple of questions and see what your reactions are, and then we'll move to Susan. Does that sound okay? Just to take an audience break and we'll go to that. Reactions on the right track? Different from your own experiences, Bill?
On the Math in Common, what's your findings of how well, after they got trained in professional development and work on standards, they were able then to pick it up at the site level and start to get better on their own? That whole continuous improvement, improving science idea.
Yeah.
Did you see that happening at all? And these are pretty good districts that are working.
Right. So the answer is right away. In some places, and not right away in others, and in some places really thoughtfully done and compelling, and in other places not so much. So even within any of the school districts, which are 10 districts, it's more than 250 sites, you see a tremendous variation on the ability to do this. And it has a lot to do with these other component parts. And still, one of the learnings in Math in Common is the tuning up process better done in a few places that are likely to be kind of, change ready, as contrasted to working in sites where there's greater resistance and less strong leadership to help you from the outset. So where, as a district team, should you be investing those resources so you yourself as a district can be better at supporting district and site level leadership. So we have very, very quick implementers, and we make the connection not causally, but we make the connection in a correlational way between rapid implementing systems and their ability to get started pretty quickly and to do this at a pretty full throttle. And we see the sites that have less leadership, less capacity to get going, as having a longer road ahead.
And then the question is that when there was rapid implementation, did they also then develop the capacity for figuring out what's not doing as well as it could and how to do something about it? And was there a connection between that and better performance?
So the first part I can speak to, and the second point not quite yet. But some of these instructional models, and Susanna, your comment about I spend some time in the school sites, I think I can help with your question in this way. Imagine going into a math classroom in 5th grade, and Dale and Bill and Neil go into a classroom. Dale is the classroom teacher. I'm a coach, and Bill is a principal, and we go into a classroom, and everybody in that model is comfortable enough watching Dale teach, and Dale is comfortable enough teaching, and at some point during the lesson, I have an idea of a different way that these set of issues could be presented or discussed or have engagement with my students in the room. Dale genuinely and generously steps aside, and I take control of the classroom for a brief amount of time. Bill has an opportunity to talk with Dale about what we saw by sort of a little side conversation. I step aside, Dale comes back to the classroom and tries to re-engage and it's like having taken that feedback in real time. I mean, think of the fluidity with which you might be providing on-site real-time professional learning coaching to help everybody in the room get better. And the students are completely okay with it. The students are fine with it. And yet everything I just said, and the culture and the customs and the traditions and the feeling in the school that would allow that kind of teaching, co-teaching, reteaching, professional learning, peer discussion is pretty unusual. But nevertheless, there are examples of lots of things that we've seen along the way where the coaches become infiltrated, the teacher teams become really close, there are expectations and norms that are pretty powerful. But I don't want to overstate the case. Not everywhere, not all the time, it doesn't work in a lot of places, but we've also seen a lot of great examples. Yeah, please.
So I'm curious as to your suggestions for how the state can facilitate more of these collaborative environments.
I think we'll answer it a little, and then Susan will talk about it a lot. Susan will talk about it a little. I think the answer to your question is what's the model for the architecture within our broader discussions of systems of support that are going on today generally for how these kinds of networks and systems can be made available. And I would add to it, what's the qualification that a team needs to have in order to say that they really understand what the sustained, slow-going lead looks like for this kind of work? So I'm of a mind that what we've learned watching standards implementation is really about the slow-goingness, the methodical, the sort of incrementalism of watching people get better. And if that's a signal that we're learning and that we think is actually really important to take away, then how can we help state system, county systems, regional delivery systems, providers of services, all the many, many different mechanisms understand that set of identities that people have for going at this implementation slowly, methodically, really does take a while, and that it's the long run. So that's not generally the way that we think about legislation. That's not generally the way that we think about kind of systems to mediate complicated problems. It's an alternative view. We'll take one more question in the back. Yeah, please.
I just had a question about other obstacles such as teacher turnover. So even if you have really good professional development and strong leadership, if you have a constant churn of teachers, how does that affect implementation?
Absolutely right. Particularly in math and science, we are very short, and we know this. And it's a constant challenge. What is it about the support for new teachers on sites? What are we doing in our teacher training programs to allow for the mentorship and the supervision for onboarding new teachers to be able to do this kind of work? I don't have a good answer to your question. I think it's been clear in the work that we've seen in standards implementation where the stability of a site and the stability of leadership of the site has allowed for greater retention overall, and it yields. And at the same time, none of us control the keys to the kingdom, people's careers and their journeys and their mobility and people switching and swapping. And so, not a particularly helpful answer for you, but the greater stability at school sites in terms of their faculty and staff leads to a greater implementation against the standards. And at the same time, if we have people who are great at instruction and they move around, they bring their good craft to new places, and that's positive as well. So just one of the overarching challenges in California is highly qualified teachers distributed virtually to rural areas and to our urban centers. So I'll stop there, and we'll give Susan a chance to take the standards implementation discussion in a slightly different direction. Thank you.
I'll firstly be reinforcing Neil's point in several respects. And so my comments here, and the summary of our report is going to be optimistic as well. And this is important for a few reasons. We come at this differently. We're two very different teams. We both used the RAND ATP, but we used different waves of the RAND, America's Teachers Panel. And then we use different data sources as well, so that you have two completely different sets of teams coming up with similar answers. I think can lend some confidence to our optimism. And the other piece of our surprising optimism here is my collaborator and co-conspirator here is David Cohen, who is not known to be optimistic, right? And so, in fact, a pretty tough critic of previous efforts at California standards implementation. And so he shares the optimistic view, and we should all take this as a strong signal. And another piece that I'll be echoing also is the incremental findings that Neil had. We are finding the same. Overarching takeaway is a little bit of improvement. But a little bit of improvement is a big deal for Common Core, which is a hugely ambitious effort. We would be suspicious, I think, if we saw a lot of improvement coming out of these survey results from that questionnaire survey. So we agree that the mechanism here is incremental. And this too speaks to the importance of stability, not just in the teacher issue for teacher turnover, but also policy stability as we move forward. Thankful to our research team. There are a lot of different data sources going into this, a lot of administrative data, 2 waves of the ATP, different than the waves that Neil used, as well as a stratified random sample of California superintendents, as well as additional interviews. Our overall questions are about California teachers' perceptions of the Common Core and its implications for practice, the sources that teachers use in their instruction and the sources of that, and where do we go from here? Some of the big takeaways are the durable acceptance of standards amongst educators, which came to us as a surprise when we were looking at some things, looking at this nationally, and teachers' perceptions of using the standards and the standards documents in their practice, as well as front lines perceptions of improvement, especially improvement in terms of the alignment and quality of the support they're receiving, but also huge variation in understanding the standards and how to put them into practice. So in particular, where is the data and evidence coming for this? So in terms of standards and durability and use, the majorities of the teacher surveys, for instance, said that they believe that the standards are appropriate for the children that they teach. This crosses and spans teachers in different kinds of teaching contexts. They feel strongly that the curriculum frameworks help them teach and that they use the state standards documents. We also asked a series of questions about perceptions of improvement. Oh, we have a little formatting curiosity here. That should be perceptions of alignment. Some things are getting lost in translation here. And here we broke it out by low poverty and high poverty, low English learner and high English learner. And this is at the school level, teachers teaching at these levels. And one of the things that we found, statistically significant differences, that teachers in high EL schools, English learner schools, were more likely to report improvement, either a little improvement or a lot of improvement. They're the dark blue, and teachers in low English learning schools. And alignment between professional development in their district and the needs as a teacher. Again, here we see a difference between teachers in high EL, it's in the dark blue, and low EL in the green, teachers in high poverty gray, and the low poverty blue, for perceptions of improvement. So additional evidence to support Neil's cheerfulness over there. But there are, of course, continued challenges to developing the capacity to make the resources and materials coherent and usable. A big piece of this is limited state capacity. But we even see this arising in districts and counties that have dedicated staff to support instructional improvement. And so we'll unpack this a little bit here. And one point, going back to the happy slide a moment ago about teachers' perceptions in schools with higher concentrations of English learners, reporting that they saw improvement. Our other survey results also reported that teachers in high EL districts were less likely than teachers in low EL districts to say that they had the materials that they needed. So one of the areas for the state to move forward is in terms of the instructional materials to support English learners. This is a theme that we heard in our interviews coming from a state and regional leader, that we've made improvement in this space, but it is not yet perfected. There are also disparities in terms of geography. And as we think about the range of different kinds of learning opportunities, or learning opportunities that Neil was mapping for us, and we have some formatting curiosities here. It really becomes a challenge for small districts or districts with fewer staff supports. This goes back to Susanna's point in our opening session, right? How few adults there are in California schools. And this came up in our interviews, our 155 interviews, the need for more adults in these places to help support instructional improvement. This especially came up around issues of curating the materials. Those of you who are in the morning session on this topic have heard me speak about this before. This came up, again, a constant theme in over 150 interviews about the need for more curation for the explosion of materials that has happened in the Common Core era. They're not organized, they're not bundled and put together. Where do you go to get your Cliff Notes to have it pulled together for you? It just doesn't exist. And this, in conjunction with not having enough staff support, not enough adults in the schools, can exacerbate this challenge. Now, as we have some different questions on professional learning opportunities than Neil, and while overall teachers report that they are happy with the quality of their professional learning opportunities, we ask them slightly different questions that really try to get at, are you getting the kinds of professional learning opportunities that research says we know are more likely to improve instruction? So we asked a battery of these questions. Here are just 3 of them, especially getting at, did you have sustained opportunities and explicit opportunities to learn how to align materials to the standards, how to align activities, teaching activities to the standards. Other questions about lesson plans, this comes on recent work showing the importance of not just having professional learning opportunities and not just having new curriculum materials, but these two things together and working in concert with each other. You can either see this as the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. So about 50% in ELA of the teachers surveyed said that they were getting sustained and explicit professional learning opportunities connected to standards aligned materials and teaching activities, less so in math, less than half. So one area for future consideration. But again, overarching theme from our interviews and surveys is to stay the course. This again underscores the importance of the stability that we've talked about, and to move from here. And again, just as our respondents wanted us to stay the course, we want California to stay the course, there's also a strong recognition that, boy, we have a long way to go. Where do we go from here? I would love to hear your thoughts on staying the course, how we can go about supporting the further development of instructional materials for English learners to support curating the trained and professional learning opportunities with explicit and sustained focus on online learning. So Neil and I have consumed a lot of oxygen in the room. We're already at 1:35, so I don't know if you want to open up
We
the
had a little
tables.
bit less time because the break went longer, and I'm trying to stay as far away from the computer as I possibly can, since that was not a very good thing in the beginning. Let's just open it up and have a discussion. If we end up wanting to go to those, we can.
Yeah, so thank you for the presentation. So for the piece on English learners, when you talked to the people you interviewed, did they cite the EL roadmap? I was fortunate enough to be invited to participate in that work group, and there's a brand new ELA, ELD standard. So what did they say about the roadmap, and are they using it? And because dissemination's been a little bit difficult.
Yeah, you know what? So when it came up in a positive sense.
Mm-hmm.
So I could not say that a majority of our respondents
Sure.
but
Yeah.
they didn't.
Yeah.
But I will say that when it came up, it was discussed positively.
Okay.
And again, I think this can speak to the incremental nature of this, right? That the initial response to it is positive, I think.
I think the more it gets disseminated, the more positively people.
Yeah. And so it suggests, that it didn't come up very often. Suggests that it is a dissemination strategy,
Yeah.
right? And dissemination strategy are the kinds of problems you want to have, right? Dissemination is
that's right.
easier than
Yeah.
some other kinds of challenges that we face. Yep. Or can be easier. So.
On your, that last chart you had on professional learning opportunities, and you differentiated between math and reading. Was that for all teachers, or was it just for elementary teachers?
So this was grades 3 through 8.
One of the pieces of feedback I've gotten is for elementary teachers in the math area, professional development opportunities and the needs to help the elementary teachers has been more of a challenge in the math area than it has in the reading area. And part of that is in the old era when we had just the California standards and we went to the Common Core, we moved a lot of topics in the Common Core around. We still had the same subject, but we started teaching geometry like in second grade, and by moving those topics around, it was more of an adjustment for
Yeah. So it'd be helpful for us to disaggregate that and just restrict it to 3 through 5.
Yeah.
Good point.
Just have a quick question. In either body of research, did you guys have any indication about the effectiveness of the train-your-trainer model that we're seeing so much? Is it getting to all teachers in California or just select? No, that's a loaded question.
Yeah, I can't say that we know about the train-the-trainer model from this research, and that doesn't prevent me from giving my own response to it. I guess I really pause because I'm not sure that you can train the trainer if we're not sure how to do training very well to start with. So these are, at least the insights from the work that we've been involved with, is that these are, professional learning models that are not, they're not training. They're much more subtle than that. They take a lot longer. It requires much more pure cooperation. It requires much more camaraderie within the system structures. So I'm just really reluctant to let us sort of imagine that standards implementation happens through train-the-trainer implementation kind of norms. Nothing that we've seen would support that that's the image to have in our minds. And do other people agree? I mean, there might be insights in the room that are similar or different.
I have a bit of a different question. This is about vendors.
Yeah.
How are districts and schools navigating vendors, and what is the good and the bad of the whole process?
So this comes from our interviews. We asked about this. And what we heard was a lot of confusion and uncertainty about who to use as vendors. The superintendents ask other superintendents. It's still like teacher to teacher in terms of where to get your information. But overall, our takeaway from the interviews was this is a space where more information would be helpful for decision making at the school level. Who the vendors are, what they're offering, who else is using them. Not necessarily an evaluation of them, that can get more tricky, but just what is the space, what is available, even how much does it cost, what might I get for it. And I think this could be a space that, while it would require some data gathering and some new platforms for information sharing, this is potentially a space where we're thinking about the state level involvement, where there could be some just additional informational supports in terms of the space of vendors and what they're offering. It can be enormously time consuming to try and search out that information on their own.
And is there a sense, there's one if it's kind of neutral and no information, and another if they're predatory.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, and I mean, we have a long history of this in education, right? So going back to Title I in the 1960s, where the film strip projectors would go around the schools saying how much you really need a film strip projector. So it can be that. So I think there's a range of considerations.
Yeah, let's bring a few other examples. We know of and have watched the procurement process of aligned materials be handled very differently in different kinds of districts. There are places, of course, that have a really thoughtful process. You've been nominated as a teacher to be part of an evaluation team to pilot curriculum and to try and understand your own sense of standards alignment of those materials. Those teams are brought together. Sometimes they're supported by district C&I teams. Sometimes they're brought together by outside consultants. Sometimes that goes to the board for kind of consent calendar vote. Other times it's done more kind of from the top down, where products are chosen by department leads, and there's sort of a drop kicking of instructional materials to the front of the classroom doors. People don't feel as though they've been consulted very much, and everything in between. So we know all about that. I guess the whole vendor question for me is tangled up with district's decision to purchase under whatever vendor agreements are worked out, and then linked to, as it's always been, the question of who's teaching what in their classroom on any given day, and the ability to supplement with materials that people are finding online or from past incarnations. I'm reminded of a comment that Bill Honig made a while ago when you were working on the state adoption list, where you got to see the volume of these instructional materials offerings that were being delivered for review, pallets of books and supplemental materials that needed to be considered. And the task of evaluating what a vendor brings to you is a monumental task. And so the idea that we're streamlined with this, or have consistent ways to do this, or have good ways to curate it are all very important considerations. Yeah.
Just in response to that, the real change in materials does not happen at the end of the process when we review. There's not much really you can do. You can just say no or yes.
Yeah.
The real change is that if we're basing our decisions on frameworks and standards, that goes into should go into the development of these materials. So you did see changes in the materials based on what the board adopted from the beginning of the process. So it's not all the eggs are in the basket at the end. It's a lot of it's in the beginning.
Did your research include looking back at the slide about when districts chose to adopt instructional materials? And I was just looking back to see, well, when did the state board take action on their lists? And so it was 14 for math, 15 for ELA. First operational SBAC was in 15. Like, what either systems or structures or pieces did districts feel like they needed to have in place before they made that investment? Was there a decision point or some common element that said, okay, now we're ready? Like, was there a...
So I'll say a little bit, and Francesca, maybe you want to add to it. The experiences we had watching districts go through the procurement process was that they were balancing the investment with the timing of kind of a natural skepticism that the early versions of materials were in fact aligned. And I remember conversations with David Foster and Patrick Callahan where they were pulling pages out of textbooks. One cover had, that they're aligned to the 1995 standards, another one that said that they had just been realigned to the new California standards, and then you would open the book and it would be unchanged page to page. And so you had to question whether or not, there actually had been enough time that it allowed the vendors to do anything but stamp the books. And so that sort of word got out pretty quickly, and I think it added sort of a natural reluctance for people to pull the chute too quickly. And that's in part what the way was. I also want to point out that as a professional development strategy, there were lots of districts that were asking their teachers to build materials. And, notwithstanding the concerns raised by Heather Hill and others in the academic community about just how hard it is to write curriculum. I mean, goodness gracious, the standards are complicated, the standards are new, curriculum development is an exceedingly hard job, and yet people were being asked to write their own stuff. We had examples from districts with whom we've worked of C&I teams trying to stay one day ahead of the teachers on writing curriculum in math, which is just, horrifying in all respects. And so that stuff got subbed out for ultimately waiting long enough for what they believed were real standards aligned. So Francesca, do you want to talk more about what you heard in those interviews?
Yeah, not only to add to what you were talking about with the rigor of materials that needs to be given to the teachers, but then also a system or process for how the teachers will actually use those materials. Will they know how to use the materials? Will they have assessments, formative assessments to be able to use? Or will they be able to supplement with what they've already created or online materials? It's a combination of a lot of those things.
Just for our last 10 minutes, I thought maybe it would make sense. Oh, that didn't come up, did it? Oh, it's very big on my screen and very small on yours. But based on this research, what do you think should be top priorities for the next administration and legislature? The goal of this is really to pull us back to kind of the instrumental things, particularly at the state level, that may be able to be done that can help this process move a little faster if that's what we want, or at least be sustained over time. So it would be good, I think, maybe take a minute in your mind to think of something, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about it. Because each of you.
Should be state investment in some kind of selection. Right, so I'm doing this.
Are we talking or inputting?
Actually, we're not even inputting. We're about to come together and all. I feel like this is small enough that we might as well have a full discussion. I just wanted you to take a minute, but it didn't work. That didn't work. So let's start with the three of you. What is your sense of what we should do? What were you typing into the thing?
I did out to type.
Yeah.
And then where I got hung up is this within the scope of what the administration and legislature can do in a local control era? Because I think what we need are the models of good professional development, sustained, collaborative. Is that the role of the administration and legislature? I don't know. I mean, there are funding implications for that, but that really, it's a best practice, needs to be enabled by giving teachers time and space and cost more time.
Yeah. So what is it that the legislature can do or the state can do to support those kinds of practices? Sorry, I had to put it away. Did either of the two of you?
Not to put you on the spot.
I think ongoing support and training, going back to my original question about the whole train-the-trainer model, just ensuring that every teacher in California gets the support that they need. And sometimes we have to go slow to go fast. Maybe it's looking, critically.
And another thing the legislature or the state can do is to make sure that these local areas have data that they need to understand if they're going in the right direction or not, or if they need to be able to change course. Making sure that that's somehow easily accessible and they can use the data to inform the questions that we have yes, in the state.
We can have a kind of discussion.
I think, number one, the first thing is that there's got to be a commitment.
Oh, it does come up here.
To build a support system without getting into what the details are. We're committing to putting resources and energy into building a supportive system for this local. You guys talked about that at the last meeting, so that's number one. Second thing I think needs to be done is somebody's got to conceptualize the different leverage points that you're aiming at. In other words, there are things that you do for teachers in a classroom with students. And who does it? It's the principal, teacher leaders, sometimes districts, sometimes outside. So that's one target. Another target is the school. How does a school organize to develop continuous improvement and so forth? And who are the ones that can affect that? And the third level is like districts. And what do districts do? Who do they select as principals? How do they give time and resources for collaboration? What's the accountability system? Is it at the service of instruction? All those kinds of issues. And then there's the other ring, which you have a lot of. Those are universities, or subject matter projects, or CDE, or all the different nonprofit groups that are supporting. And they can be aiming at teachers, the way you were talking about. They can be aiming at training principals. They can be aiming at helping districts or counties. So it's a complex system, and we tend to, even in this, we tend to lump everything together as the same, the same problem. But they're different. You have different strategies for different levels. I think that should undergird whatever system you follow.
That makes lots of sense. So we encountered in our interview several challenges when we put this question, similar question towards people, and one was, it would be nice to have more state-level support, but in the era of LCFF, when we just went away from categoricals, how really do we do that, right? And I'm forgetting now the state bill from the past that had a set aside for teachers. So that's both an important complication. And then the other piece was in the LCFF era too, how do we better connect, or I guess it's LCAP, right? LCAP was what the districts are deciding to invest in instructional support. So how do we connect those pieces? How do we connect really LCAP and Common Core implementation more tightly in the next incremental phase of its life? And then the third piece that came up over and over again was, this places are still recovering from the Great Recession, right? And so the places that were investing in instructional support before the Great Recession found a way to, soldier on after. But boy, if you were weak on instructional support before the Great Recession, it just all fell apart, and it's been really hard, especially in those places, to rebuild. So those were three challenges that came up that I wish I had answers for, but they're things to consider moving forward.
So while local control relies on local control, should the state be doing training? Should they be producing some superintendents and principals in particular who have these abilities? That's a yes. Any other?
Well, I mean, one way out of this is a regional system of networks. In other words, the state used to have a CSLA, which trained principals, and it was very well supported, and the districts like it, and the education community, that went away. I don't think you'll ever get something like that again. But you could have some discretionary funds invested in regional principal or teacher leader trainings on how to build collaboration and understand and do the things you're talking about, and run people through that, and then form a network. And that can be done by a bid locally, maybe a university in several districts or whatever combination, and then get something going and have some common protocols that they all use. In other words, some kind of questions. So I think there's a hybrid or a balance where you don't have a statewide effort, but you do have a statewide effort in the sense of the Senate.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah, I would build on that. The irony of standards implementation, in my work it's been on math and science, but I'm sure it applies at some level in the ELA world and in other areas where we have new standards coming online. At some point, there's this balance between it mattering in content and it actually being content agnostic when you're developing the support systems. And so the kinds of things that Bill was just describing, what part of that is actually related to standards aligned instruction where you need math content experts in order to be successful, and in what part is it related to the way that you design systems more generally and support structures in your school sites more generally and professional learning norms and teacher teams more generally, that becomes ideas that cut across content.
Yeah,
and I think that
every effort should be aimed at improving instruction in the classroom.
So you
that
mentioned
should drive everything.
Right, and so even just by asking the question this way and answering it the way that you did, I think there's a huge opportunity for a richer conversation than we've had. It's not a one or the other, it's a both and those are, I think, where we see the greatest examples of standards-aligned implementation is when we see systems that have been developed to support teachers getting better at instructional content while they work on this together.
How about this table? Any thoughts on this and about what the legislature should do, what the state should do?
I think I asked that question.
Yeah.
I'm going in a different direction. I come from the higher ed perspective, and I'm curious, your initial poll was, sort of what roles can different entities play. I think 0 people thought universities, including our public institutions, that do have some state direction are playing a role currently. And I'm curious for new teachers, so this may not necessarily be for well-established teachers, but for new teachers, do you see that as something that's promising? I mean, the state does have some control over, for instance, CSU, which is our largest producer of public school teachers. Are there things that should be asked of these institutions at this point?
And I think that goes right to how Susanna then switched the question to from what is to what should. And had it been what should, I would have put higher ed at the top of that. Because across fields, across disciplines, we know that it's that primary original form of teaching and instruction. If we got that right, if teachers learn in college what they went on, the local content they would teach, and also how to teach it. Exactly, those connected, we would have a very different scenario. So normatively, yes, but it's quite administrative undertaking.
And it isn't that they are not thinking about that at CSU. So it's some of that certainly is going on. But we try to do something more systematic, and we're not able to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I think the initiatives that are going on in some of the CSU teacher training programs are remarkable in this area. And yet it took longer, right? It's all newer. and it's not uniform, and it varies in couple areas, but certainly in many of the CSU campuses, the memo has gotten out that alignment with the standards and a serious study of the standards has got to be part of the induction experience.
So we're just about out of time. The one other thought I had in drawing this together, because I do think that we've made some, as you've noticed in there, some decent progress, but again, it's at 60% or 50%. That leaves a lot of teachers that really need something to help them get to where we want them to go. And so trying to think, to really ask this question over the next bit about what the state can do to help that move forward, I think that's what our charge is moving forward. So thank you for coming for this. And